Hello and welcome to another edition of the Playlist Podcast. We apologize for our absence since the last show, which covered The Dark Knight Rises way back in June. But we're back with a chat about two films garnering a lot of heat at the playlist. I'm your host, Eric McClanahan, and joining me today is managing editor Kevin Yeagernuth and our fearless leader, Rodrigo Perez. Our slate for this week's show is as follows. The first half is our review of The Master, followed in the second half with a review of Looper. Let's close the lights, open the curtains, and fire up the projector.
Are you mixed up?
No, sir.
Are you more jumpy than you were before?
No, sir.
And how's your sleeping?
I sleep just fine, sir.
When you sleep, do you have nightmares?
But not as much as before.
You've had violent episodes.
Yes, sir, we all did.
You pulled a knife to the throat of an officer.
Well, you box that out.
How would you yourself rank your overall health?
Strong.
What about this last episode on the way home?
What episode, sir?
The episode you had on the way home here.
I don't remember an episode.
You have no memory of what happened?
We were celebrating. We were drinking and dancing. I don't remember an episode. Was there a fight? What happened?
Let's just see if we can't help you remember what happened.
Okay.
This film has been talked about a lot, especially on our site and a lot of other sites. It's had a lot of, lead up with the Venice Film Festival, and then it played at TIFF. It's had its release dates moved around. There's a lot going on with this film. There's a lot of expectations out there, and I'm just curious. We should start it off like we normally do. To Kevin, let me know your broad thoughts. What do you think about the film in general?
Broad thoughts. I really liked the film quite a bit. I think a common sentiment among many is that they would like to see it again, and I think that's true in my case. I probably will go see it a second time at some point. But I do have issues with the film, which I guess we'll get into, but I think it's certainly one of the more unique pictures to come out this year. It's really masterfully assembled and masterfully. And for me, the real highlight of the film is really Joaquin Phoenix and his performance. I think he makes the picture what it is. Yes. And Rod, over to you. What do you think?
I like The Master. I don't know. I don't love The Master like everybody else does, and I like The Master. I thought it was interesting. The performances are obviously incredible. You know, there's certain movies that are like, this one needs a second viewing, and that was my initial thought. I'm going to go see it again, but it hasn't. I don't know about you guys, but just to detour slightly, it films to me, I always break down into experience versus resonance. Mm-hmm. Like, this is how I felt in the moment, and this is how I felt weeks later, and sometimes they're very drastically different. And I don't know if everybody thinks about films in those two ways. I know I've always encountered a lot of people who just like their initial reaction is always just the reaction, and there's no ever change. But I would say that a film like this generally is one of those films that makes me think a lot, and to the point where it becomes greater than the actual experience. And I don't know if that's the case with this. And generally, this would be the type of film that I would assume I would just keep lingering on and keep thinking on and going over in my head, and I really kind of haven't, so I'm not sure if I'm going to see it again. I don't know. That doesn't necessarily detract from it, but I would say I'm guessing on the spectrum of the three of us, I may have liked it the least, but that's pretty relative because there's lots to love about it, and it's really interesting. But it may be a little too. We're always talking about how, well, we've often talked about in general on the site and things like that, of how, things that are ambiguous can be good, and I'm sometimes wondering if things can be too ambiguous to not illuminate.
Yeah. I'm curious. Like, I don't know. I saw it a second time last night, so now I've got the 2 viewings in, and it definitely
Right.
works. For me, it worked much better a second viewing. I really liked it the first time, but there's just little nuances and things that I picked up on more the second viewing that I appreciated. But I think what I love most about this film is that it's actually pretty simple when you break it down. It's a really simple story. It's a dual character study, which
Right.
I think maybe we've been led to believe that there's more to it and more to dig into. And there's some things in the ending that seem ambiguous about the film, or things that aren't answered. But
Right,
to
but
me-
no, I kind of agree with you because like the other day, Vulture did this
Yes.
this piece. It was like, "What's the master about?" And
5
I-
interpretations or whatever.
Right, 5 interpretations, and I had 2 things. Like, I generally do this thing on Twitter where I write my comments and then I delete them and I don't send them. So I had 2 responses. One of them was being a cheeky one that was like, the master is about something, and I think and then my second one was like, well, obviously wouldn't fit in 140 characters, but like, it's about a guy who, coming from World War II, ends up, coincidentally or accidentally mixed up with these people, and sort of his life gets intertwined with them, and they feel, but it's like, as you said, kind of straightforward.
Yeah, and I actually kind of found that refreshing because the film is so beautifully. I think we can all agree that the film looks amazing. I'm assuming you guys agree.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean-
Looks fantastic. Yeah.
And with all the hoopla over the 70 millimeter and all that, like, it's kind of fascinating that he shot so much. Like, this is the most close-ups I've ever seen in a Paul Thomas Anderson film. It's made up almost entirely of close-ups. We do get, some nice vistas in certain parts of the film, but like, the use of close-ups was a really interesting choice to shoot a film on 60. He shot on 65, and some places it's being shown in 70. So that's really interesting. But yeah, I love that it's just a simple story that looks so cinematic. And that was really refreshing, especially after the summer where I don't know, like, even the big films like the Avengers and things, like, they had that sort of digital feel to it. Like this, there's nothing like seeing something shot on film. So yeah, I really love that about it.
I think we can probably all agree that, like, aesthetically, around the board, there's nothing but like A pluses, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, yes, the cinematography is amazing. Yes, the costume design, the everything that Jack Fisk does, the way, it's beautiful, absolutely. But yeah,
Yeah, the period detail made me nostalgic for a time I've never even, lived in, which I found really, really interesting. I mean, even more so than something like Mad Men. I just feel like he nailed the look of it. And it's like those early on when he's a photographer, when Joaquin Phoenix character is a photographer, and you just get the montage of children and couples getting their photos taken. Like, there is something so eerie about how authentic that looks.
Well, the interesting thing that you bring up Mad Men is, and I think it's night and day, is like Mad Men fetishizes that period and makes it cool for,
Yes.
like, people 20-somethings to want to dress up like that. This movie doesn't do that because it's just authentic. It feels lived in, and I think that's a huge difference. Mad Men makes it look cool.
Yeah. So Kevin, you said specifically you really latched on to Joaquin Phoenix's performance, but I think Philip Seymour Hoffman is almost as good. They're both. I feel like both these guys could be up for Best Actor this year. I'm really curious as to how that's going to go.
I think they're. I mean, for me, it's just a personal preference, but they're both great. They both are they work so well with each other. It's really, I can't remember the last film that had 2 leads that were just this compelling and just played off each other so well. In this film, it's just on a pure watching a film just for acting alone. I mean, it's just a great piece of performance. It's just a great piece with some great performances.
Definitely.
And they had great characters to dive into. I mean, these were complicated guys. They're, 2 people who were a lot more similar than they probably realize. They're both sort of yearning and hungering for some kind of meaning, and like after coming out of a pretty devastating war. And I think they really do some interesting things, and they make some very fascinating choices.
That's another really strong element for me for the film too, is that World War II is usually talk about fetishized or just, glorified in a way, like The Greatest Generation. Like this feels almost unique in the fact that this is exploring a character that goes through the sort of things that we usually see connected with Vietnam soldiers, in films. Like he's really struggling to figure out what he's going to do next. I thought that was a really good element to the film too. It made it feel, different.
Well, in terms of the performances, yeah, they're both fantastic, and Joaquin's going to get more attention because it's more showy. But I agree with you, Eric, that like Philip Seymour Hoffman is, on par. It's just Joaquin has got the more showy, and it's not even the more showy performance. It's needed. His character is supposed to be like a feral kind of animal, and to an extent, and Philip Seymour Hoffman's character is something else. He's more of he's the wiser sort of father figure in the role, so yeah, I mean, they're both terrific in it. They're sort of how they're inextricably tied to one another, how they're sort of the need for one another, how they sort of complete one another, I think is pretty awesome because of how it plays in so many ways, how there's like a father-son aspect to it. There's an almost a love kind of relationship, especially near the end. It sort of hints at that. I mean, that sequence is really, really fantastic where he sings Slow Boat to China.
Yeah.
And there's also a guinea pig aspect to it. At first, the master, Dodd looks at Freddie, yes, as a sort of like curious, interesting experiment. But then, at one point, I think it's Amy Adams' character saying, he's too wild. Maybe we should let him go. And then, the master basically counters and says, if we leave him, we failed him, and we can't. He takes on this sort of like kind of love to him. There's this sort of understanding, and then there's of course the part of it that we're like. There's sort of, and Paul Thomas Anderson has sort of hinted at himself. It's weird, though. Every time Paul Thomas Anderson, and maybe because he's trying to avoid Scientology, I think he's mentioned time travel as the theme of the film. Not necessarily the theme, but he mentions time travel more than almost any aspect of the rest of it. I'm not saying that's what he's trying to hint at. That's what it's about, because that's what these people are sort of talking about in some sort of way. Mm-hmm. But that ties into that theme opaquely of have we met each other before? I feel like we've met each other in a past life, and that I feel is sort of the sort of interesting, like, the meat underneath all of the superficially simple stuff that we've been talking about. It's about this, but these people are exploring these other ideas of past lives, and that's what the interesting I think about that is that it's so, even though Anderson I guess like flirts with it and touches upon it, it's still really opaque, and it's only scratched at a little bit, and it maybe that's why it's a little bit murky and unnerving to people, because they're like it's interesting because it creates a lot of people to search for a lot of stuff which may or may not be there.
Yeah. That was actually the most interesting point I thought in that Vulture piece that you referenced, Rod, is there was the mention of, at least even on a metaphorical level, that Freddie could be a version of Lancaster, a previous, like what Lancaster might have been like. And I thought that was really interesting because you see these little moments where Philip Seymour Hoffman just loses his temper, and it's like little hints at what he may have had and what he's learned to, to suppress, basically, through his
what he might have been when he was younger and more not as wise, kind of thing.
Exactly. And I love this. There's just those little hints that Anderson puts in there, and Philip Seymour Hoffman puts in there with the performances, that allows you to see that is enough where you could see why he would be so fascinated in Freddie, because if he can fix this guy, it's like the poster child for his, for the cause, for his thing that he's trying to move forward. Yeah. And I love that. I mean, Anderson has always had like a real faith or trust in the audience, which is so rare for an American filmmaker too, which I really, really appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. There's all this stuff. Actually, this conversation is now making me want to maybe try and see it a second time.
It's worth it, man. Seriously, it's so well crafted that, I mean, just soaking it in again and living in that world for 2 hours again was really, really great. So, I
mean, I have no argument with that. I mean, just having experienced it the first time, you know, I looked at Ollie's review and Charlie Schmidlin's review, I believe, who's the first two people who reviewed it for us. And I got to say, like, you know, I think Charlie gave it a B+ and Ollie gave it a B. And I kind of love both those reviews. They're both pretty generous in their criticisms and their and what they love about it. I think they're nice and fair reviews, and they're not just like, this is the most amazing film, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know. I kind of agree with both of those, and I'm probably in that sort of camp somewhere, maybe.
Kevin, do you agree that Ollie that specifically cited this as being maybe a little bit too cold of a film? I think it was in his review where he cited that. Kevin, do you agree with that, or?
To a degree. Yeah, I mean, it's a hard question to answer. I mean,
it doesn't really let you inside.
It doesn't really let you inside, but I'm not even sure it's to the detriment, if that's necessarily a detriment, because I can't say that that kept me uninvolved. You know what I mean?
Right.
I think that there is a coldness to it, but it didn't bother me, I guess. I think.
Right. That's also possibly by design.
Yeah.
Well, it feels like I feel like Paul Thomas Anderson's moving more towards this. There Will Be Blood's a pretty cold, cerebral film too in a lot of moments. I mean, you have there's more entertaining moments in There Will Be Blood with just some of the lines. You know, we don't have a "I drink your milkshake" line in this film. We don't have those sort of things to hold on to, or to become like pop culture memes to float around. You know, we don't have that in this film, but I do think. They're both films, There Will Be Blood and The Master, really are compelling to watch because the characters are just so fascinating. It's not that they're likable or that we have to agree with them, but I think Anderson just has this knack for creating characters that just stand out and can be. And he's also got this thing where he trusts his actors. He gets something, the performances he gets out of his actors. It's like he'll let them go really far with their performances. You know, like. You know, the ending of There Will Be Blood, you know, Daniel Day-Lewis pushes it really far. He goes borderline over the top in that, which I think really works. And then look at the moment in the jail scene between Philip Seymour Hoffman and Joaquin Phoenix in this, where it's just Joaquin Phoenix's rage is just gone. It's let loose, you know? I love that he's willing, he lets his actors go for it and like experiment. But it just feels right for all of his films. It's just something, I don't know how he does it, but he must get some level of trust from his actors that I just don't see in most American films, you know?
Yeah.
I also feel like this is, sorry to cut you off, but like a continuation is sort of like, to me, Paul Thomas Anderson's career is two phases, the early career and a new phase that started with There Will Be Blood. And I feel like this is very much a continuation of what he started with There Will Be Blood, but pushing it obviously a lot further. As you said, there's like, it's almost, I mean, there's similar kind of themes, there's similar ideas. There's two men struggling. There's a father figure and a younger person, and they're somewhat similar. There's, you know, people of, you know, there's just like godlike figures. There's a lot of like narcissists in that kind of like in the Daniel Day-Lewis and Philip Seymour Hoffman characters. These people who believe that they're not wrong, and you know, causes and beliefs and that sort of thing. But he definitely really pushes it with this film, obviously, and like strips it down to just its pure elements. And I guess if I had to, like, someone said, you know, what's the thing that you love the most, is that I guess it's like how he is so confident that like that this was going to work, that he writes a script that is so bare bones and so like, you know, there's not a lot of plot points, there's not a lot of things that happens. It's like these two people and their interactions and how they put the push and pull between them, and the confidence for someone to see like, this is what it's going to be. There doesn't need to be these huge arcs. It doesn't need to be plot points. Just to know that it'll work, and then for him to execute it like that with these just actors, and it's pretty bold. And that's the stuff that just makes me go like, wow, that's, you know, he pulled it off, and I guess he assumed he could, you know.
Mm-hmm. I think you bring up a really good point that I agree with you that Anderson's sort of entering a second phase with these films. I mean, you could look at both There Will Be Blood and The Master, and it's really about men who are trying to control their environment to a large degree. And you know, in this film, both Joaquin or The Master and Freddie, I mean, The Master, for me, he's just as lost as Freddie is. He's just found a way that he can control whatever plagues him within the formation of this cult. And just going back to the coldness of the film, I mean, when we go into that last scene in London and he's in that gigantic room, I mean, I think the coldness and the size of that room and how small he is just speaks to, you know, how isolated he has become in this machine that he's created to sort of control control whatever he's trying to grapple with. I think he's isolated himself. And there's a similar sense of isolation at the end of There Will Be Blood as well.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So I think there was definitely a lot of thematic overlap and in both films, and yeah, I think Anderson is really exploring some very different, I think much more mature themes in these last two films.
It's interesting too, is like Punch Drunk Love seems to be a really important film right now in his career, where like that was the big turn, I feel, where, you know, Hard Eight or Sydney, however you refer to it, Boogie Nights and Magnolia were very, very clearly referential, you know, like he's clearly influenced by many filmmakers, but those films sort of screamed their influences in many ways, you know. I mean, Boogie Nights is almost Goodfellas in the porn industry, you know. It's like they're almost the same film.
Yeah.
But then you get Punch Drunk Love, and it's just this movie that's really hard to classify. I mean, it's a romantic comedy, but it has these experimental elements to it. It has a really bizarre performance from Adam Sandler that works well, I always felt. And then, yeah, it just feels like that film was the big turning point, like where he matured, or he was taking a step towards a new phase in his career. And I'm loving where it's going, because his films are getting harder to classify and harder to say, well, like, oh, he was, you know, influenced by this filmmaker and this scene and this and that. And it seems like he's really he's zeroing in on his own voice, which is great to see.
Well, I think he's also telling smaller stories. I mean, Magnolia and Boogie Nights, they take place on these sort of grand canvases, where these last three films are really, you know, one or two character films. They're very honed in. They're very they're smaller. I mean, that's not quite the right word I'm looking for, but they're much more focused, maybe on.
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean? Like
right there.
They're a lot more focused in terms of character and theme and whatnot than his first two films.
Do you guys think it's interesting, or like maybe you have no thoughts on this, but with this and There Will Be Blood, There Will Be Blood had almost no female characters in it, and this one has some, but he's really been honing in on his last two films on just, you know, like you said, focusing in on one or two specific characters, and they've been specifically male stories. And that's really a way, I mean, he's always focused almost every film on the father-son kind of relationship, but, you know, Boogie Nights and Magnolia had just as many female characters mixed in there as well.
I think, yeah, I mean, they are male-driven stories, but it's interesting, at least in Punch Drunk Love and The Master, the women are important.
Oh yeah.
They're maybe just not central. I mean, Amy Adams clearly has a very strong pull on The Master, and same and Barry Egan and Punch Drunk Love. I mean, he's pushed around by his sisters. He's trying to understand this woman. He's trying to understand himself in the context of this woman that he loves. So yeah, they're male driven, but I think the women do play, at least in those two, in Punch Drunk and in The Master, they do have an important influence on the turns of the male characters.
The stories are also, especially with, you know, the last two films, are in many ways built around, you know, power, the thirst for power, manipulation, a lot of things that generally are associated with men.
Yeah.
There's a sort of like, a greed, a lust. That was awesome in There Will Be Blood. The sort of the lust for oil that turned into this lust for something much more, much more ominous. And a lot of those things I think are just I think just because of the themes that he's exploring, that they just happen to be like male centric. Also, when you think of, for just as a writer, when he started writing the story, he started writing it about World War II. When you think about World War II, you tend to associate it with men.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's a conscious thing, more of a just here's what I'm writing about, and these things sort of seem to relate more to men.
With this and There Will Be Blood, another similarity between the two films is they're tackling kind of grand American, almost like grand American stories or in our history. There Will Be Blood, a lot of people thought that was going to be about the origin of the oil industry in America, but really, and with The Master as well, it's not the Scientology movie. I love that he puts that stuff in the background, or that's like his setting, to explore really interesting character dynamics. I just think it gives the film for him to zero in on something specific like that, just gives it more power, as opposed to being like almost a biopic element where like, here is the beginning of L. Ron Hubbard's, Scientology.
Right.
I love that.
Thankfully, that stuff has never really interested him.
Exactly. It just, yeah.
And I said this, way back when, before I saw the Master, and I just had read the script, and he's, I think, in the same way There Will Be Blood. He used the novel Oil as a jumping off point. He started just adapting that straight up at first, and he maybe adapted the first act, and then he used it as a jumping off point for something else. I think he did the same thing with Scientology, and I think he's pretty much just said that as well. Like, here's a jumping off point for me, this character, this person who did these things and explored these ideas, and then it becomes something else. More power to him, because yes, it's more interesting for the audience, and why not use something in history to explore whatever themes and ideas that you want to.
Like, basically, There Will Be Blood and The Master, they both have like an epilogue. I think in There Will Be Blood, it felt more organic, maybe. To me, The Master started feeling long when the last sequence started. The film was really sort of a really concise, focused, really powerful piece right up until, for me, the film should have ended on the flats with the motorcycle riding. Like, yeah. I would have loved to see the credits start rolling as Freddy just drives off into the distance. That would have been where I would have done it, but it continues for another 20 minutes with England and all this stuff. And that scene with the two of them is really good. But to me, it just sort of, it feels like padding that doesn't need to be there almost. Or it feels like extra character stuff that I don't think it doesn't flow well for me at all. But again, I need to see it a second time. I need to see how it works again, or if it does or doesn't. But the first time through, the film started feeling long at that point.
I feel the opposite. I feel like the codas, I feel like the one in There Will Be Blood is much less effective and more jarring. In fact, I remember I've only seen There Will Be Blood once. I try and sometimes not see movies twice just because I want to keep that. Like, I loved that first experience. I thought the movie is great, so I almost didn't need to see it again, so I haven't. But I remember at the time being like, whoa, this all of a sudden just a jarring transition, and I felt like that coda, while it ends up being awesome, the transition to get there was not very seamless.
I don't know.
Whereas I felt this one was, I can understand you saying it's being long, and it definitely feels like sometimes in the last act, there's almost like three parts where it feels like it's going to end. Like, is this the end? And it then doesn't end. And so I get that sentiment from you, like that there. I think there's at least 3 points where you're like, I think it's going to end now, and it doesn't. But at the same time, that ending is so necessary for them to meet one more time, and for them, that's sort of like, it's probably a few years later, right? Like, it's just like they are like these two magnets who wherever they are in the universe will be attracted to one another, find one another, whether they like it or not, you know? And I mean, the was that a dream? Was it, did he really call? Whatever that, I mean, that's kind of pretty important to the film. So I don't think you can, I don't think it works in the same way if you chop off that coda, or that epilogue. And especially just at the last scene where, I think Eric was sort of suggesting it as well. It's just the, you know, I don't know, he's singing the song. He's also crying because he's like saying goodbye. It's like sort of like, we have to end our thing here, even though I don't want to, because I don't know, one of you guys said this sort of machine's built up around me now, and I can't really go back to what it was. But I wish I could. But you're too much of a liability now. But sort of like those two guys will grow old, and the bad version of this film is, one of them old, dying on a bed and calling the other's name out when they on their deathbed. You know what I mean? Like, but
Yeah.
I think that's what the movie is trying to say in a way, and I think that's what goes beyond the simple surface stuff, is that these are souls that may have met one day or were somehow connected in this way that it sort of irrevocably changed their lives, and once those souls like kissed or touched or whatever it was, they just could never, they had to be together. It's just like this, like a almost a positive and negative that needed to be in that space,
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting for them to find themselves once again years later, and for. I felt my interpretation was like the only reason he basically says you got to go is because his wife is there, and then that's also how I also think, like, it's deceptive how Amy Adams or females aren't important in that story, because in a way she's pulling all the strings,
Yeah, there's definitely a Lady Macbeth vibe to her, which has been cited by a lot of people, and I definitely saw that too. So
yeah. So that's what I kind of love about that ending, is that he's just sort of like, kissing him goodbye in a way, and it's tragic for him because he loves this soul that's a part of him in this way that he doesn't even understand, but he knows that it just needs to be in his life, in his sphere. So yeah, I don't know. I just think that's why it has to be there. Although maybe you're right in that it's late in getting there, or it's
No, for me it was just that push and pull dynamic had already been
expressed.
Yeah, it had already been expressed quite well.
Right, but they've never been apart, right? After that, once they got together.
No.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah, they've been basically, he's been with him throughout once he goes on the boat. Yeah, until that point. So I think it is important that he has to come back, and they have to have some like finality to their relationship. Definitely. I read a crazy theory that someone thought that Joaquin Phoenix actually dies when he rides the motorcycle off in the desert. I don't.
Really?
And that everything we see after, which is why he's sort of tamed his anger at that point. Like when he goes back to see Doris, the love of his life, and he doesn't do what we'd expect him from everything we've seen previous to that. Like he doesn't lose his temper. He's actually kind of calm and collected about it and mature. So he's made some changes, but
he's still kind of dickish though.
He is dickish,
like
but
in
you know
some
what I
of
mean?
the things he says to
he's not banging his head against the wall.
He doesn't explode or anything. Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't know how that's even. I mean, the one thing that the person who had this theory connected it with was that he drives off, and then the next shot is Philip Seymour Hoffman walking in the desert. It's almost like pallbearers, like there's a car behind them, and him and his daughter are sort of slowly walking. Like, why else would they do that unless they were just walking upon a dead body? But I don't know. I don't feel like there's enough quite there. Like, Paul Thomas Anderson there's ambiguities in the film, but I just don't think there's enough there to suggest that. But I just thought it was an interesting take on the film. But actually, for me, it's less satisfying because it's refreshing to see. I've also read some points that people made where they think the ending, nothing changes. Freddy is basically the same guy, still just looking to get laid all the time, and all id. But he has changed at least a little bit, and he's at least knows that he's still going to have to be searching because he knows the cause is not going to work for him either. So I don't know. I need that final 15, 20 minute coda as well. So I'm more with Rod on this one, on the end.
I guess the other
That's
thing is
fair.
everything we're just talking about is like, I guess just the power of the film. There's and then maybe, and it's funny now I'm probably contradicting myself, where it's like maybe like the ambiguity is its power.
Yeah.
Because it's just like there's lots of cool things in here that like I'm always against like, this is my concrete theory. I don't
Yeah, me too.
I'm talking about this, possibly these souls or these things, but I kind of like it more ambiguous. I don't want a concrete answer. I don't want it to be, it's actually this means this and this and this. And I kind of want to hope, and I actively think that Anderson doesn't know the answers to these things either, that they're not meant to be spelled out, that there's some of the ideas and things that he's playing around with, and to hint around, if they point to things that people want to think about, that's great. But I'm very resistant of any kind of hardcore, this is my interpretation of this, because I guess I feel like that defeats the point. And I think you would ask him, he'd probably say the same, but I don't know.
Yeah, he's said that in interviews. He's been very, and it doesn't seem like he's just being cheeky or coy, just for the sake of it. Like he always says when he's writing, the characters sort of like lead him at a certain point. He knows he's on to something good when the characters are kind of, they're writing their own story, and he's like putting it down, he's transcribing it basically. So I think that's the case. These characters come to him, and from there he's just going to see where it goes. And I definitely, I think that's another thing that just makes him stand out amongst so many filmmakers out there.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who else would have made this film aside from like. Is also my. Know. Well, aside from foreign filmmakers who are making films like this all the time, that's my only small little beef that I have. But I shouldn't, and I don't hold against the film. But like, this film has been heralded by. I guess my issue is it's like that line. It's not the band I hate, it's the fans. My main issue is that. There's a lot of people who love this film who don't watch cinema like this.
Yeah.
And I won't name names, but I know a lot of people who are like, wow, and they and I know them, and they don't care for cinema like this, and they don't watch stuff like this, and they like, I guess no one's doing this on an American mainstream level.
Yes.
And that's for sure. We have to acknowledge that, but there are plenty other filmmakers in the world who are doing, Joe, however you pronounce his last name, Actapon.
Oh, Patchapong Weerasethakul.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jesus.
Filmmakers like that who are doing interesting, opaque, ambiguous, strange, wonderful works as well that don't get the same acclaim because they're not by this guy who came to fame by being a younger Scorsese or something. You know what I mean?
There's no ghost monkeys in this film, man. That's for
right.
Sure.
So, I mean, it's oranges and apples to an extent, but I guess that's probably one of my small issues on the outside is that people heralding this film for being some sort of, ghostly, strange, weird experience. And because, and on some level, I don't know if those people have seen other films to just buy, you know what I mean? Like there's Bellatar or just like people who have been doing for a long, long time, equally strange and wonderful films. And I not that I'm holding against it for that, but I just felt I should mention it.
Time travel has not yet been invented, but 30 years from now, it will have been. I am one of many specialized assassins in our present called loopers. So when criminal organizations in the future need someone gone, they zap him back to me, and I eliminate the target from the future.
Oh la la.
Loopers are well paid. We live the good life. And the only rule is, never let your target escape. Even if your target is you.
Speaking of time travel.
Exactly. It's a theme, I guess. Looper, the new film from writer-director Rian Johnson, opened just this last weekend. I'm going to be really curious to see how this film does. I, for one, hope it does really well. But just jumping into it, what do you guys think? Let's start with Kevin. What do you think about Looper?
I really liked it quite a bit. I think I said in my review, it's Ryan Johnson's prestige before he does his Inception. I think this is him really elevating himself as he's really stepping into into becoming a blockbuster director, but not just like any other Hollywood guy who can do special effects and spectacle. I think there's some interest.
Nolan kind of way.
Sorry.
I
mean in a Nolan kind of way, yeah.
Right, but let's not go like blockbuster connotes like he's turning into Michael Bay or something.
No. I mean a guy who's bringing actual ideas and some narrative challenges and is trying to do something creative and muscular at the same time. And I think he does it here. I think Looper it's really inventive. It's really compelling. It's really, when I watched it, I was pulled in from the start right away. I just think it's a smart film. I think it's a real accomplishment from Ryan Johnson.
Definitely. Rod, what do you think?
I didn't love Looper. I will preface it by saying I think Ryan Johnson is awesome. He also seems like one of the nicest people in the film industry. Mm-hmm. I also will constantly root for Ryan Johnson because he's creating original stories, and he's done 3 movies that have been 3 original stories, and it seems like from everything his interviews have indicated is that he wants to. Why would he do a comic book movie or an adaptation of a book when he can create his own stories? And he has this ability to create this own, like people give him paychecks to create original stories, so he's going to keep doing that for as long as he can until something goes wrong, and then he's forced to do an adaptation or something. He's essentially said that, and I love that about him. I will always root for him. But Looper, I mean, I didn't mind Looper. I mean, I'm not going to give it an A area grade, but there were a lot of things that didn't work for me. I guess to the core of what they are, I feel like Looper's 2 movies in one. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but there's the Blade Runner-ish time travel story with Bruce Willis and Joseph Gordon-Levitt, and then there's a second half, which is this witness meets this kid. It's just very influenced by Witness. I mean,
I never thought about it, but you're right. Yeah.
Well, he's really said it, but it's also very true. Mm-hmm. I mean, not that there's anything wrong with that. But then there's the kid story, and to me, the first half is visually interesting and interesting and whatever and cool and whatever, some great time travel ideas, but the movie doesn't really start for me until the whole reveal about the kid, and that's where like the emotional heft really comes in, and that's kind of brilliant in that whole part of the movie, but it takes so long to get there. I think I was like, wow, and I think I actually quickly checked my phone to see how long into the movie it was in, and I don't know how long. I think it was it 2.5 hours?
No, I think it's about 2 hours.
It's 2 hours. Okay, so I think the whole reveal about the kid doesn't come into about an hour and a half. So
no, it's not that long.
Are you sure?
It's not 3/4 of the film before the kid comes in.
But
before the reveal of who he is.
Yeah, that's probably with like a half an hour left in the film when we actually see what he's capable of.
Exactly, because then he's just this kid, but then when the powers thing, and it's like, oh my god, and it turns into this whole like, he said, Ryan Johnson said in one interview, my favorite kind of movies have always been about one thing on the surface, but when you get into them, they're about something else, and that's for sure, because that's exactly what Looper's about. It's on this log line is about one thing, but it's essentially about something much more deeper and something completely different. Like the whole, log line of this guy's sent in the past to kill his younger self, or younger self to kill the older self. That's not what the movie's about. That's what gets you into the movie. but I guess my problem is that there's so much time spent on that. By the time you get to the kid and you get to that whole, which is to me the heart of the film, that just arrives way too late in the film for me, and that's where the film, like, I felt like I was watching it, and I remember thinking, like, I didn't want to look at my watch, but I was thinking, like, this is all interesting, but I'm not as fully engaged as I should be. And when the kid and the whole thing that with the kid happened, that's when the light turned on. I was like, wow, oh, okay, here we are. This is some some deep material. I was like, wow, like, I felt like my heart palpitated at that point. And that's when the movie got awesome, but that was so deep into it. And then and then there's like 30, maybe 40 minutes left, but I think it's really about 30. And so therefore it makes the first half feel, in retrospect, pretty hollow, and the second half, or the last act, pretty awesome, but not enough. And that's essentially my problem with it.
It's kind of similar to me. It reminded me of District 9, where it used a sci-fi conceit as like the setup, and it's a long setup, but then ultimately what it leads to is something else, but really it's a springboard for kind of an action thriller, like it's not a pure time travel movie, which I found really surprising and refreshing by the time that there's this whole other science fiction element introduced.
Right. I think that what the new element that he introduces is great and is the heart and meat of the story. I just think it arrives so late. So I'm not knocking him for doing that. I think it's smart and wise. You know what I mean? Like, even Inception, which is about, these guys, dream thieves. It's really about something much more deeper than that. That's the surface meat to get you in.
I think my biggest knock on the film is the use of voiceover, but then again, it's like, which is only really used in the beginning, and then I think at the end of the film, it just, yeah. But then you think about it, how else is he gonna introduce this, set up the world and introduce how like loopers work without it? It just, I kind of wish there was another way to do it, but that's kind of my biggest knock on the film is otherwise I found it all, I feel like it fits quite well because you've got the elements of, another recent indie sci-fi film, Moon, where it's like, what would happen if you met yourself? And it's a little bit of a different version of that in this film, but I feel like that feeds really well into the story, even when he gets to the farm with Emily Blunt and the kid, and it cohered really well for me.
For me, like I said, I mean, I was taken from the start, but I do see Rod's point that, the deeper elements don't really come into play until the second half, and that's fair. But I don't know if that necessarily means the first half is hollow. I mean, I think just as a genre film alone, the first half is just so unique and exciting that I'm okay with spending some time there before we get to the more meat and potato stuff. And if that means that meat and potatoes is the second half or the last quarter or whatever, that's fine, because I think all that meat and potato stuff still works really well and delivers what it's supposed to.
Well, plus,
does it deliver as fully as it could have if it had spent more time? Maybe not, but I still think it works quite well.
The other thing is, I guess, that world isn't particularly remarkable to me as well. I don't. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to knock the film. I enjoyed it. I'd probably give it like a B, but I found that world, the futuristic, this is the setup. I found that to be kind of unremarkable. I was like, this is really familiar. This is Blade Runner on a much, much smaller budget, obviously. There's that one shot when they show the city, and it looks like the cityscape of Blade. That was like that's direct homage to it, but obviously that it's set in 2040 because things aren't that far advanced, because budgetarily, like there's not things that make it really seem all that much futuristic. You know what I mean? Like not many elements to it are really that futuristic. Yes, there's a flying motorcycle that we may have in 40 years too, and then they put drugs in their eyes. Yeah, people drop LSD. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't super special, and it just I don't
even mean aesthetically per se, but I just mean sort of hanging around with these junkie hitmen who and he's not exactly the most likable guy for a lot of the movie, or much of the movie, but I still found him a kind of interesting guy to hang out with, and I don't know. I just, it worked for me in that regard.
It's just a subjective thing. I don't know. It's just that I never really super got engrossed in the beginning of the world, and then it wasn't till Emily Blunt and her family and that whole story is introduced. That's when the movie starts to like kind of wake up, and then when we find out this kid what he means to this story, that's when it, and that's where it gets really, really interesting, because it's like he's going to be the make or break of the future. Like it becomes much more this thematic larger thing and this morality play of like what's going to happen here, and what's more important, the personal or the global, I guess. You know what I mean? Because it's like Bruce Willis wants to protect his wife, and Joseph Gordon-Levitt is the younger man who's not as wise and starting to realize that that the personal doesn't really matter in the end.
Has there ever been a movie where the protagonist is at once he turns into the antagonist by the end, but also at the same time another version of himself is the bad guy too? Like, I just got to give Johnson originality points, a lot of originality points with this film. Like you Rod, you made a point. Like, yeah, the cityscape is very reminiscent of Blade Runner, but I liked the sort of toned down, it's not too futuristic. Like there's even that really great exchange between Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Jeff Daniels where he's giving him shit for not being original. Like he's wearing clothes that you could find in movies from the 1900s and all that. Like I don't know, I like the way that all fit in, and there's a lot of great sequences in the beginning of the film too. Like Paul Dano's older version as he's literally disappearing in one take. That was an incredible scene, I thought, like where stuff like that. And then the montage of Joseph Gordon-Levitt getting from 2040 to 2070, like just there's moments like that I was really glad to have in there, even if the end of the film is much better than maybe the first hour and 15 minutes.
And I like going back to the detail, I kind of like the grimy 2040. Yeah. Like there's another little detail that I noticed, like the cars. They're like cars from now, but they're kind of like really shittily modified with this kind of solar panel junk on it. There's a couple of brief scenes of that. And I just thought, yeah, he's working on a smaller budget, so he kind of has to do that. But I don't know. I thought it was quirky. I thought it was just kind of interesting and fun. I almost preferred it to just seeing another bland, generic, this is set in 2200. So here's, Cloud Atlas has a big future narrative as well. And it's actually emotionally, it's the most resonant part of the film, but visually it's actually the most dull, because it's just, you've seen that cityscape in 5,000 other movies. Whereas this, I think the sort of kind of in the future, but kind of not. It just, oddly enough, it made it a bit more compelling.
I'm down with that too. I guess, like, first of all, I guess I want to reiterate, I don't think it's that Blade Runner-ish.
Okay.
Like it's not, you know what I mean? It's, but I also just feel like there's a little bit of it that's like, put it this way, I prefer the down and dirty sci-fi world of that, not far in the future, of District 9, way much more to this, where that felt much more creative and interesting, and this felt to me, this is all done because of I don't have budget, so I'm writing it like this. It just stood out like that to me throughout.
Well, fair enough.
So Rian Johnson is a great filmmaker, and he's interesting, and he's going to keep doing cool things. This just didn't particularly work for me.
I'm with you, and I feel like this is a great return, because actually Brothers Bloom was a film of his that I did not particularly like, but I loved. Yeah, I loved Brick, but Brothers Bloom, disappointment. This one, I think, is his best film. So
I think we can all agree he's a guy we're going to be excited to see what he does next and what he's got next on plate, because I think we can all agree he's just a creative voice in Hollywood where there's very few.
Absolutely, so, yeah. Can't disagree with that at all. Like, I can't agree with it more. He's just gonna keep doing interesting things. I don't know if he's gonna, I think like his ideas and his concepts are always awesome. If anything, this one just doesn't execute as well as maybe it could have, but we're certainly glad to have him.
Yeah, we need more Rian Johnsons making films in this country. That's for sure.